So today I'm happy to present about Micron. So Micron is a open source LabVIEW based microservice architecture slash template. And I just add the GitHub link for it. So to give a quick introduction about me, my name is Karthik Abiram. I'm a LabVIEW champion, CLA and a CTA. I work at Soliton Technologies as a solutions architect and key account manager. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So to start with, right, what is my vision for Micron, right? So it's basically enable easy exchange and swapping of microservices built with different programming languages. So typically that is something that usually do with Docker containers, but the idea here is I want to create a similar ecosystem similar to a Docker Compose, right? Where for executables instead of containers, and provide tooling, libraries, and batteries that are missing in the default gRPC implementation, like a client starting and stopping a service whenever it wants. And also reduce the barrier of entry in creating microservices in different programming languages. So these are the different Micron's vision, I would say. And on exploring, I also found one possible similar project called Dapper. I think that is initially created at Microsoft and it is now an open source project. So in case if any of you guys have heard or used Taper, I'm very much interested to hear about it. But yeah, I'm yet to explore on it. But yeah, my general idea about this is create an architecture where we can create services across different programming languages and deploy it. So I see a question. So what is a microservice? In simple terms, you can consider that whenever we build an application, it will be a single executable, right? Like you put all your business logic in, build it into a single executable. Whereas a microservice is typically that you have multiple smaller executables which all come together and which is what is your overall application. So in simple terms, you can consider every microservice to be a very small executable which has a very clear responsibility and functionalities. So now before going into the whole world of monolith versus microservice, right? I want to just put this slide, right? Every design is basically a trade-off. So, and microservices also has its own trade-offs. This is monolith. The top advantage I see is you can leverage multiple programming languages very easily, and you have very hard separation with clear responsibility for each service. So that is the top advantage. And the trade-off is some things are more complex, especially when you're dealing with inter-process communication. And there are also some constraints like you can't share references or instrument handles across different applications. So that is again a challenge. So those are some of the trade-offs. So now, how do you install Micron, right? So we have a prototype or an initial version of the Micron package that is already available. So for this, we need to install two major things. One is the LabVIEW gRPC package, which is available in GitHub releases, and also a Micron package, which is also currently available as GitHub releases. So once you install both these packages, Micron will be available in two locations. One is it will be available in tools, Micron, create new microservice, using which you can create a new microservice template. And the Micron APIs will be available in the functions palette and the data communications Micron subpalette. So what are the different components of Micron, right? If we want to put it in a very zoomed out view, it has like two major components. One is the Micron CLI. So this is a very small command line registry for registering microservices. And the next is the LabVIEW starter code. And the LabVIEW starter code has a server template as well as a client template. And it is a very minimalistic wrapper on top of gRPC. So yeah, the reason being on top of gRPC is even people who are not used or known gRPC, they can still use this template and start creating microservices. So that is again the notion of reducing the barrier of entry, right? Without knowing the concept of gRPC or without fully knowing the concept of proto, we want to ability to create anybody to create a new microservice to get started. And so the Micron CLI, like I told, it's just a registry. And I'll come back to the reason for having this registry, right? Maybe later. But for now, the concept is services can register itself saying that I have now started. This is my connection detail. And whenever I'm stopping, they can unregister themselves. And what are the APIs that will be available in the functions palette? So it will be under data communication Micron, and you have a sub palette for server, and you have a sub palette for client, and you also have a sub VA for creating a template, and you also have APIs for talking to the Micron CLI. So typical workflow, right? Like a very basic workflow with a Micron server is basically it's a 5-step process. So the first is you get the arguments, uh, basically like the connection details, the name and other stuff, typically from the command line arguments. And then you pass it and start the server. And the server, once it starts up, it will give you a event reference, which you register for it. And once you register for it, you basically, whenever a new message somebody is sending to it, you will get a Micron message, and which you can parse it. And basically, a Micron message has two parts: a payload and a command and a payload. And then you can send a message back, or you can send a response back by sending back a payload. So it's just a very basic string. So you can add a number of messages you want, like it's just a JSON, right? You can define what all APIs you want to expose, and each of the API you can say you can correspond to a particular command, and you can define what is a payload for it, which typically can be JSON. And then finally close. So basically, these are just the 5 APIs which can be easily plugged and used by uh, in any of the frameworks, right? Even DQMH or any other of the modules, anything which has an event structure, you can easily start using the Micron server. So now coming to the client flow, this is just a 3-step process. So we have a start or connect API to start with. Then you have a message API. The message API has this command and payload, and then it gets this response. So basically, from a API or user standpoint, you can just consider that as you're just passing a string that is going to be received by the server, and the server can then again send back a JSON string, which you can again get it back here. So yeah, this is basically the client flow. Now, how do you create a new microservice, right? So then we have a template that is available that will immediately allow you to get started. And it basically asks you two inputs. One is the directory in which where you want to create the microservice, and what is the name of the microservice. And once you click create, it will get created, and it will give you the path of where it got created. And once it gets created, so this is the template project that will get spawned up, and this will be like a ready to run sort of code, right? You don't need to make any changes to actually see whether it is running or not. So it has basically 3 major portions. So one is the client API. So these are the APIs that will be available for the whoever is going to consume the service to talk to it. So those are APIs will be available under this library. Then we have this core. Core, I would say, is like where you want to have all your business logic. So I always think that the business logic should always be independent of other frameworks and stuff, right? Whether it is Micron or gRPC, without any of those dependencies, your core logic should be ideally in a class or a library where you'll be able to easily write unit test cases for it. Then you have a service. Service is nothing but the UI similar to the UI that we saw earlier, right? With an event structure is where it will be getting messages, and you will be it will be basically calling the core APIs inside the service. And you also have the build specifications already created for both your service and the client APIs. And the general sense is that your microservice you will build as an executable, and for people to talk to your service, you will build a PPL, which is your client APIs. So this will be a PPL which you can just share it to anybody, and they can just call those APIs and use it to talk to your service. So yeah, I think next I'll jump to the demo. So I have the Micron installed in LabVIEW 2023. So once it's installed in tools, Micron, that'll be the option to create a microservice. So here, let me just point to a root directory. So it got created. Yes. Yeah, so let me open this project. So this is the project that got opened and it has the similar structure that whatever we saw in the slide deck. So this is the service and this is the API. Under APIs, we have a list of methods and we also have an example code that is here. So we can run it directly in source code. So let me start the service. And here, this is my connection string. So I'm giving my connection string and asking it to connect to it. And I'm sending a command and a message. And let me run the client API. So from the client API, it is able to send a message to the service and then it is able to get the response back. So this is the indirectly running from source code. Now let's go ahead and talk about building it as an executable and directly talking to it, right? How we want to distribute it. So we have two build specifications. So let me just right click and build both. So this will build a service as an executable and it will build the client API library into a PPL package. So let me explore it. So this is my builds and I have the service, which is an executable, and I have the API, which is a pack project library. So let me close my project and open up the builds, APIs, and this library. Yeah, let me open the example. So now I have only opened their client, right? I have not run the service. So now let me try starting a new service, right? So here the client is actually starting the service and then it will be communicating to it. So here I specify the path of the executable or where my service will be located. And I can specify what port number I want. If I want, I can change the port number to say something else as well. And I specify what is the network and what is the service ID for it. Network you can consider like the like everything together, right? Like the whole application in a typical sense as a monolith, you can consider that as a network. And every service that is running within that application layer, you can call it as a service. And here, yeah, okay, let me just run this. Yeah, so this has started up the service and it has been able to directly pass the network and service ID to it. And it was also able to send a message and get it back. So now since the service is already running, now it also has that intelligence using the Micron CLI that if the service is already running, it will directly connect to it. So now if I send a message now, it will be able to directly talk to the already existing service. This is because the Micron CLI actually registers it, and before it tries to start a service, it will check whether the service is already available and the connection string is there. And if it is there, it will be able to pick it up and use it to talk to it. So this is the demo. Now let's take a quick look at the code, right? What it does. So essentially, the similar code, whatever we saw earlier, it's just more like in a queued state machine kind of thing. It is there. So we are initializing and we are getting the arguments from the executable. So the client is able to send what is the port number, what is the network, what is the service ID to it. And here we are using the GLA options parser to parse the arguments and then populate the list of arguments that has been passed to it. And next is then it initializes the service. So then in the poll case, basically we have the event where we'll be able to respond to different messages here. I see a question. Can you elaborate on what shutdown mechanisms you would build into a microservice since it is essentially running headless? Yes. So the basically here, especially with gRPC, right? gRPC provides all the APIs, but it doesn't provide the API for starting a service or stopping a service to a client. This Micron is enabling you to provide you that option. So the shutdown mechanism is ideally like you can define an exit command, and you can say that when exit is called, you can then call the shutdown sequence. So it is up to the user to define how they want to handle the exit. And basically, they can define a command for exit and allow the client itself to, let's say, start it, do the operation, and then exit, shut it down. So in this case, in the example, we don't have a exit command implemented, but it can be enabled. So we can just pass a command called exit, and client can be given the power of shutting down the service as well. Okay. Yes. So this is the very simple example. And even in case if you already have a gRPC based application, to make it talk to Micron or make it Micron compatible is very simple. It is basically there are only two requirements. So one is you make it you define a proto file for a particular message. Let me just bring that up. Yeah. So this is in case if you already have a gRPC service, you have to only just define this particular method where you have a message request and a message reply. And here the message reply also includes a error code so that if anything happens in your request, you also get that message back and to the client. And this is the first requirement. And the other requirement is you allow the client to pass the arguments to your service, like what port number to run and use. So as long as you are defining or creating the command line arguments to be in this format, even an existing service can be easily made into a Micron compatible service. It doesn't need to be always started from scratch. Yeah. So I think that covers all the demo items that I had. So yeah, I'm looking for any comments or suggestions in case if any of you are interested in this type of project and you have any experience in developing microservice-based systems in LabVIEW. Feel free to drop a comment. I'm very interested to talk to you about it. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.